What's up guys, it's Z here. Welcome back to Yugioh Deck of the Day. Today we're doing an update on 2 Draco. Finally, True King's Return has come back to 3, and I think that it's fair to assume that we're going to get more stuff back eventually. We'll start with Dynamite, of course, and if we ever go to getting back cards like Diagram, Card of Demise, or maybe even Masterpiece, then this deck is going to see the light of day again. But for now, if you want to play this deck, then you're just looking for an anti-meta strategy, and that's perfectly fine because I know that even though we've got a ban list, the meta doesn't have that many changes. We've just seen the decks swap around in order on how powerful they were, but we're still seeing the same decks. So I know that there are a lot of people out there who are looking for a deck that can possibly beat the majority of those decks by using Floodgates and stuff. And of course, True Draco is the first deck that comes to mind when you see an anti-meta strategy these days. So we're doing an update on this deck. There are other versions of the deck as well. This is going to be a pure build, but you can play this with Monarchs. I've seen a lot of stuff work with this deck because it has the extra normal summon, so it doesn't really lock you into anything, and you don't really need to commit a normal summon for like that. So you can search other versions if you don't really feel like playing pure, but this is a pure version. So before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. Starting off with the monsters, play 1 copy of Dynamite. Unfortunately, it's still at 1, but I think Dynamite is really safe to bring back, so I'm pretty sure that in the next 2 ban lists, we're going to see Dynamite to 2 and then to 3 eventually, and this would be such a huge boost for the deck because, not regarding Masterpiece, Dynamite is the best monster that this deck has because it gives you access to the traps, and the traps are really good disruptions, and they're also good going second because they pop your opponent's monsters, so they're the board breakers because you don't really care about popping spells and traps with your spells unless you're playing against something like Eldritch, but the majority you're going to be seeing Dragon Link this format, so you have to rely on your traps a lot. And this deck is good because Konami did the mistake of bringing back Buster Lock, so if you feel like that you're going to be losing to Buster Lock, then just play this deck because you don't have an extra deck. You're not going to lose to Buster Lock no matter what because it doesn't lock you from summoning anything. So yeah, if you're afraid that your deck that you were planning to play is going to lose to a Buster Lock immediately, then you can switch to this deck and you're probably going to get rid of it very, very easily. 3 copies of Ignis. Ignis is really, really good going second because by using its effect to force your opponent into making some plays, for example, let's say you're playing against Zodiac Eldritch and they have to use Trident to pop your Ignis, otherwise they're going to lose their Trident. You can, if you use a trap to destroy the Trident, you don't have to force it just by attacking, and then they will pop Ignis with Trident and you get a Heritage. You get 2 draws right away because you already sent a trap to the grave by tributing for Ignis. Ignis went to the grave because of Trident's effect, unless your opponent actually decided to not use the Trident and let it get destroyed by a trap card without even using its effect, which a lot of people would not do that. They would rather get rid of the body, but that's actually a mistake against this deck because giving this deck 2 draws means that you might get another monster plus a Floodgate rather than just having a monster. So yeah, if you're playing Zoo Eldritch, keep that in mind if you ever face against Draco. So this is why Ignis is really good going second card. It forces a lot of plays with your traps and gives you more cards with your Heritage and your Disciples. 2 copies of Majesty Maiden. Having Diagram to 1, I feel like sometimes I need a 3rd Majesty Maiden, but the problem is that running too many monsters, this deck can actually be very bricky. So you run the opposite scenario where you don't have any monsters or you have too many monsters. So this is why you can tweak around, just test the deck a little bit and see what works for you. Through testing, I find that 2 Majesty Maiden are enough, but there were some scenarios where I did not have any monsters just because Diagram is at 1, and that's the problem with Diagram being at 1. It's not that you cannot pop your cards, it's sometimes you do not have monsters, and without monsters, stuff like Monarchs are after dead, you cannot tribute your traps to draw cards with Heritage or your spells, so this is why running more monsters can be tempting, but in a deck like this, it can be problematic as well. For the spells, play 3 copies of Heritage. Of course, you draw cards for all the different types of True Draco cards that have gone from the field to the grave this turn. Like I said, there's a really good synergy going second with stuff like Trident, and there are other cards that boost that strategy as well. For example, if you tribute a Disciples or another Heritage for an Ignis, and then you try to pop one of their Conquistadors, then they will try to chain Conquistador so they don't lose the card, and Conquistador will pop the Ignis if they have an Eldritch on the field, which they most likely will because they're going to use Red Elixir as well. That's always what they do. So then you can get another Heritage out of the deck with your Ignis, and then draw 2 cards. So there are multiple interactions with this, mainly against Zodiac Eldritch because it's the one deck that pops cards on command. There's not another deck that actually does that. So this is why against this deck, which is actually one of the struggles of the matchups, because against other decks, if you lock them down with maybe there can be only 1 or a summon limit, if you're playing against Dragon Link or if you're playing against Virtual World, then they can't do much. But Eldritch is a deck that is very resilient to back row, so this is why this matchup is actually hard. So you need to find the interactions that help you get more advantage if you won't have a chance against this deck. 3 copies of Disciples. This card gives you the infinite grind game. There is no way that you'll ever run out of resources if you manage your cards well, and if you always keep a Disciples in your deck to search for your Diagram, or you don't use them all too early, you're going to have your resources back eventually. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then you're going to run out of resources and you're not going to be able to outgrind a deck like Eldritch or maybe even Dragon Link, because Dragon Link, well, yes, it's a combo deck, it has a lot of stuff coming back from the grave, and when they use cards like Heavenly Spheres, they get even more dragons from the deck. So this is why you have to grind, otherwise you're going to lose even if you manage to break the initial board, because it's not like they have committed everything into it. They will still be able to do other stuff. So this is why keeping an eye on how many copies of this card are left in your deck is a really good tip if you want to play through Draco. Play one copy of Diagram with a 1 terraforming to search it. Yes, Diagram is at 1, and unfortunately you have to play Desires, so Diagram being at 1 actually can sometimes hurt you because you will not see it. But since it's not really searchable through any true Draco means, it's not like you will see it every single game. So you play 2 copies, and that's fine, but it doesn't matter if you never see it. You can still win. This is why the Floodgates are here. The Floodgates are the main win condition of the deck, not Diagram. Diagram is just a card that if you see it, your deck just becomes 10 times better, because you can search anything on command. If you need a monster, you're gonna set a monster. If you need a spell or trap, you can search spell or trap. If you have too many monsters, it pops cards, so you can pop cards on your opponent's field and fuel your heritage. And yes, Diagram is the essential part. I think if we have to choose between a card of Demise or Diagram coming back to 3, I'm pretty sure that the players who know what they're doing with their deck would choose Diagram coming back to 3 rather than a card of Demise, because yes, card of Demise seems like such a power play, and it is, but Diagram is the central point of the deck that gives you access to whatever you need. Demise just gives you random cards. You might draw insane cards with Demise, and you might draw cards that you already have or cards that you don't need with Demise, and sometimes Demise is not even activatable if you have too many monsters. Yes, that can happen too. So this is why Diagram is a much more important card to come back, and I'm pretty sure that it would be a card that Konami would bring back, especially now because Calamities is banned, so it's not like we're afraid of doing something like Lithosagim or Babies and Dinos, so it's not really a big reason for Diagram being at 1. It would just be a card that we would see in True Draco. And Card of Demise, if it went back to 3, it would be playable in other decks, although True Draco was the main deck that we'd be seeing, but I'm sure other decks can abuse Card of Demise as well. So this is why if Konami had to choose one of those 2 cards, and we had to choose between one of those 2 cards coming back to 3, I'm pretty sure Diagram would be the clear winner here. For the draw cards, play 2 copies of Pot of Desires. You cannot play the Pot or the Prosperity that came out because you need to play an extra deck for that. And yes, if you want to play an extra deck in True Draco, then you have to give up on Monarch's Erupt, which is an insane card against pretty much everything, and a win condition against combos especially. So I don't see a reason why you want to play an extra deck just to be able to go for Prosperity. So just stick with Pot of Desires. Like I said, even if you banish your 1 Diagram or your 1 Dynamite, you don't really matter. Sometimes all you need to win a game, you just need 1 monster on the field, any monster, and a Floodgate or Wuchu in the back row. That's pretty much it. 3 copies of Pot of Duality. I'm maxing out on Duality because it's not like a risk of using more than 1. It's not like Desires where I would never want to resolve more than 1 Desires, because through testing, when I activated more than 1 Desires, I never won because I actually lost all my resources, so tried not to activate a second Desires during the same duel. But Pot of Duality, you don't really care if you draw multiples, and yes, it can set you back with 1 more card that you can't really use during the same turn, but during the next turn we'll give you another card, and you want to see it because you want to see a specific card, so this is why Duality is such a good card. It's like Prosperity, but without having you to use an extra deck, so yep, just like that. 1 copy of Card of Demise, of course. If you see Card of Demise, you're the luckiest person in the world, and you're most likely going to win the game unless you drew it with like 3 True Dracos in your hand. That's unfortunate. And 1 copy of Upstart, you have to maximize the consistency of the deck, especially now, so this is why Upstart is such a good card, because the less cards you play in your deck, the more chances you have of seeing the cards you need. And yes, I would rather play an Upstart rather than 3rd Desires, because yes, Desires, when you see it, it's a better than Upstart if you see just 1, but sometimes you will draw multiples and you don't really want to see that. For the traps, play the freshly new True King's Return back at 3. This card has been at 1 for such a long time, and when we saw it going to 2 during the previous list, it was very obvious that it would go to 3 in this list, and it's such a huge boost for the deck because going second, this deck I actually struggle against a lot, but the more traps you have to distribute, then the more monsters you can pop, and having only 4 traps was not enough, because with only 1 Diagram and 4 traps, you could not search them anyway, but now you have 6 traps, so this is why this deck is really good right now, going second against combo, because you can pop their monsters, and they have to negate graveyard effects with card like Savage, so they don't really get any value of it, they just save their monster, so this is why this deck is so resilient against other stuff. And also the traps are disruption, because if you do not really have a Floodgate, the only other way to disrupt your opponent is using the traps to tribute summon during your opponent's turn to pop monsters. So this is what you do when you don't have a Floodgate, and this is why having more traps is actually important, and this is why Dynamite being at 3 would be so huge, because having Dynamite on the field, having another True Draco in the hand could actually lead you to another tribute summon while having 2 monsters on the field, because you can activate a trap face up during your opponent's turn. 3 copies of True Draco Apocalypse. Of course, this card has the interaction of cutting the attack in half and the damage step interaction, so your opponent can't do anything, they can't even do a replay, and it also pops your own cards, so sometimes you pop your own traps, you pop your return or another copy of Apocalypse to destroy a monster, you can pop a spell to destroy a spell, and it fuels your heritage as well, and also has the effect to tribute during your opponent's turn, so having maybe two copies of traps of different names, you can get 2 pops, and if you have a Floodgate, and that's basically it, your opponent can't do anything. For the Floodgates, we play 3 copies of Monarch's Erupt. This is why you cannot have an extra deck. If you don't really want to play this card, for some reason, then you can run Prosperity if you have access to it, because it's better than Duality since you can look up to 6 cards. But still, I think Monarchs Erupt is such a good card. Even if you're not playing Monarchs in the deck, just playing this to hard draw it, you can still win. If you're playing with a Monarch version, then you can search it with your Pantheism as well, so it's even better in that version. But still, Erupt is such a good win condition because it's a skill drain, but not for you, so you can still use your monsters, your opponent can't. Speaking of skill drain, play 1 copy of course. Skill drain is just a win button that doesn't require any setup, because sometimes, yes, I've seen Monarchs Erupt being dead in my hand without having any monsters, which is why I was tempted to playing a 3rd Majesty Maiden sometimes. But skill drain, you don't have to worry about any of that. Even if you don't have anything, you just flip it and your opponents just look at it and they can't do anything unless you're playing Eldritch. 3 copies of there can be only 1. With Dragon Link being the most relevant deck again, I'm pretty sure this card is going to rise in popularity even in side decks and other controlled decks, especially if they don't get hurt by it, because Dragon Link is such a powerful deck, and as with Buster Lock being back, it's even more powerful than it would have been, because LP did not get banned, so we knew it was going to be a good deck, but we never expected it to be even better than it used to be because of Buster Lock coming back. So this is why there can be only 1 can shut down this deck completely, because they're all playing full Dragon deck, they don't have anything else, so just when they normal summon a monster, you flip this and it's pretty much over. 3 copies of Summon Limit. You've all seen how good this card is when you've seen it in Subterrors, and it works with this deck too. Against stuff like Virtual World or even Dragon Link, this card is devastating, and the cool thing is that this card doesn't hurt you one bit. There can be only 1 sometimes, can be hurtful for you as well if you want to try to push for a game, but you're playing all your monsters are worms, so you can't really get another one on the field unless you pop it with Diagram or something, but you don't really want to do that. Summon Limit doesn't hurt you. There is absolutely no way that you're going to summon more than 2 monsters in 1 turn with this deck. Even if you use Returns Effect to bring back a monster and you tribute 1, that's 2 summons. There's no way you're going to get a 3rd one. Actually, there is, but you don't really need to do that, since you can use Returns during your opponent's end phase, so you don't have to waste one of your summons for a monster in defense mode. So yeah, Summon Limit is such a good card that if you flip it against something like Place Combo, you're going to win right away. And even against Eldritch Zoo, if they summon a Zoo and they go into just 1 Xyz, then you just flip Summon Limit. They can't do anything. Even if they summon Borbo, they will not be able to attack directly. Actually, they will be able to attack directly, but they will not be able to summon Zeus afterwards because they've already summoned twice. And nobody summons Dryden as their first material, so it's not like they will summon a Zoo, summon Dryden, and then you will not be able to flip your Summon Limit because it will be popped by Dryden. They always summon something else. So yep, Summon Limit is such a good card. And the last card is 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. In a format where we're going to see a lot of Eldritch, people will start playing Harpy's Feather Duster, of course, the main, and those who have access to Lightning Storm will be playing Lightning Storm. And this deck just absolutely gets destroyed by something like that, because your monsters don't do anything. Your monsters cannot disrupt your opponent, you need your traps, and you need more monsters in your hand. So if your backer gets destroyed, you are not going to be able to do it. So this is why I think even maining a card like Solemn Judgment is good enough, because yes, most people do not main Lightning Storm, but they might be maining Harpy's Feather Duster, and you don't want to lose to a Sati One-Off because your entire deck revolves around that. And it's not like you can save cards by setting 2 cards and keeping 2 cards in your hand. You need to set all of your Floodgates, because sometimes you're going to get Cosmic in 1 Floodgate, so you need to flip the second one in order to be able to play. So it's not like you can play conservatively to play around stuff like Lightning Storm. So having Judgment in the main deck is so important. You can consider Strike if you don't really feel that way, or if you know that where you're playing people do not have access to Lightning Storm, then yes, Strike is a better card because it's a much better card going second. But still, I feel for a generic deck, for a generic core that you need to play in order to have as much success as possible, you need to main deck Solemn Judgment because of cards like Lightning Storm and Feather Duster being in the game. So yep, that's the deck, guys. True Draco, just an iconic deck, a deck that people used to hate a lot and now people have become nostalgic about because they're not seeing it anymore. The deck that will always be on the top of anti-meta strategy, and I know that people always try to innovate for this deck to make it come back, and who knows, maybe Konami sometimes will give us back more cards, so we'll be able to play it in a higher state. So yep, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.